Hello, everyone, and welcome to Through Time and Clades. My name is Joan,
And I'm Albert.
and we are back with another review. This is our third review for our series, and we're going to be talking about Encanto, the latest Disney film from Walt Disney Animation Studios. But before we jump into that, Albert, how have things been on your end?
I've been all right. Yeah, still easing back into work, as it were, I suppose. So, of course, I mentioned last time that I have turned in my thesis, and I'm sort of just waiting for a date to be scheduled so I can have my thesis examination, basically, which will happen at some time before the end of March. But that still hasn't been kind of nailed down quite yet, so I'm still waiting to hear back on that. But in the meantime, I kind of have other things to keep me occupied. Basically, I guess I mentioned this last time too, but I'm kind of preparing the final chapter of my thesis so that it can actually be published as a scientific paper. And in doing that, I'm kind of going back and collecting new data that I want to add to the particular data set I use for that particular project. And yeah, just kind of pulling that together to make it even more solid than it was before. And I imagine that'll probably take me, probably most of the beginning of this year, I guess, because some of that data collection can be pretty time consuming. Um, but yeah, that's probably the main thing I've been busy with. But I am glad that I am, not no longer in like full thesis writing mode. That was
Yeah,
that was pretty taxing.
yeah. I it is winter time officially,
Mm.
as far as I'm concerned, because right now we're dealing with the aftermaths of a pretty big snowstorm that hit us a couple days ago, um, uh, which has been much anticipated in the family. I'll just say that. It's been many months of, oh, they're gonna say that it's gonna snow this weekend. Oh, we're getting ready for some big flurries this weekend, and then like it never happens.
Mm.
So like this time around, I was like doubly surprised because not only did it end up happening after all,
Yeah.
but it came in such huge amounts that we ended up with like between 5 to 7 inches in some places of
Wow.
snow. Like that particular Friday night when it really started picking up, I stayed up till like 3 a.m. with Madre, and we just watched the snowfall, and we just saw it slowly cover everything, and oh, it's fun. I don't know. There's no better feeling, and I mean, yeah, there's no better feeling than just like bundling up with a blanket and a good book and just watching the snowfall from a big window. Um, so I was able to take advantage of that
Mhm.
because as I age, I'm not as excited about being in the snow as I
Right. Right.
was when I was a kid, but it's certainly fun to watch from afar
Mhm.
with warmth.
Yeah.
So that's kind of been like the most exciting thing for me this week.
Nice.
And I'm looking out the window now, and there's still some pretty big piles, but the sun is out and the temperature is warming up, so we'll see how long it lasts. But we are all safe, thank goodness.
Mhm.
No power outages, which we were worried about. That's the thing about North Carolina. Give us a giant hurricane, and we'll strengthen through it. But give us snow flurries of even the smallest amount, and all hands on deck. We gotta empty out the supermarkets, get all the milk and bread, and and batten down the hatches.
Mhm.
Um, which is that's just how it is.
Yeah.
If you come to North Carolina, you get all the seasons in a week. That's just how it be. Um, but yeah, so Encanto. Oh my gosh, I have been excited to talk about this movie for a while. Um, oh my gosh, and of course, it's like, where do you even start? Um, I guess start with the beginning. So for me at least, I had heard of this film early on when it was announced, and that was when everything was all kind of cryptic. Like, okay, it's a magical family, and one of the family members doesn't have any powers. Like, okay, that could
Mhm.
be a pretty fun premise. So is it going to be like witches, or is it going to be like some sort of like uh, Lord of the Rings kind of thing? But no, like we get more and more information, and then the first teaser came out, and like, oh, it's a Latin American picture, it takes place in Colombia. And oh, the trailer was so much fun. And I know Madre was particularly excited because our main lead Mirabel Madrigal kind of looks like her when she was younger, even down to the traditional dress.
Hmm.
And so like we were very excited for it. And when the time came for its release, I think we waited about a week and then went to go see it because it premiered Thanksgiving Eve. So of course
Hmm.
we were prioritized with other things at the time. But went and saw it, and we had a pretty good time. I certainly really enjoyed it. Um, loved I loved the landscape, loved the story, um, and the soundtrack was fun. Admittedly, I was not like super into it at first. Um, so then I give it about a week, and I go a second time to see it by myself. And I don't know what it was, but that was the one that did it for me. I fell in love with this movie. I was obsessed with this movie. I thought the soundtrack was a banger. It was so much fun. It was in my head for days. And I just could not stop thinking about it and talking about it. And before I know it, I'm seeing it again and again and talking with more people about it and sharing it with them. And I think what it was tremendous relief
Hmm.
with how this film ended up being and how
Hmm.
the greater response has been. And I think that's very important to talk about. And we'll go into a little bit of it fairly soon. But Albert, what was your introduction to this movie? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I don't remember exactly when I first heard of it. I think I also at least got wind of it pretty early on. I think I did hear about the premise at some point, probably shortly after it was publicly announced. And I did see the trailer when that came out, and I was excited to see the movie eventually. I definitely it definitely looked interesting to me, and in several regards, I thought the basic premise of the story was interesting. The setting was interesting. They featured some interesting animals in the trailer, um, and so yeah, I was looking forward to seeing it, but I didn't know when I would get to see it because I haven't subscribed to Disney Plus, and I'm currently still. Uh, well, certainly at the time and for now in the foreseeable future, I think I'm still a bit wary of actually going to the movie theater to see films, and so I didn't know when I would get around to actually seeing it. I just figured it would be one of those films I'd catch up with eventually when I got the chance, whenever that is. I'm pretty used to kind of waiting around for films. I'm not often like where I have to go see a film immediately as soon as it comes out. Yeah, even if it's a film like I'm reasonably interested in. Usually I'm okay with waiting for the right moment. Um, but um, but yeah, so I was interested in seeing it, but I didn't really have any high expectations of that I would be able to see it like in the immediate future. However, of course, you got really into the film, and then at one point you asked me, "Oh, what if we watch it together?" And I, as you, could show me on by screen sharing and because you have Disney Plus, so you could show me the film that way, and then I was like, oh yeah, I mean I do want to see the film, so that sounds like a good idea, and so we finally watched it together, and yeah, I really enjoyed the film quite a lot as well. Um, and I'm sure we'll elaborate more on that throughout this episode. But yeah, I thought it was pretty great. And later on, we actually watched it together a second time with some of our other friends too. So yeah, I've seen the film twice now. Whereas, how many times have you seen it?
Oh gosh, I think it's seven. It's been seven times now.
That's incredible.
Um, yeah, which is funny for me because I'm not a parent, and
Mhm.
I have it on good word from my sister Julie, who is a teacher of small children, that kids have just soaked up this movie so much, and they'll watch it like infinitely more times than I ever will, like even like multiple times a day.
Wow.
Um, so I know some people who really like the film who are more in our age. I mean, they've already seen it like 20, 30 times. Just can't get enough of it, I guess.
Right,
And I
right.
think even like the marketing team caught wind of that because one of their teasers, not teasers, one of their trailers for like the streaming of Encanto on Disney Plus was like, now you can watch it again and again and again. And that's
Wow.
exactly what people have been doing. Um, but I mean, there's a lot to like,
Mhm.
as we'll explain. But before we do so, let's jump to the next slide
Mhm.
and let's give a little bit of background into what exactly Encanto is for some of our viewers who have seen it and who have not seen it, which I guess will depend. So this is Walt Disney Animation Studios' 60th feature film. They made a little bit of a deal about it, like even in the intro of the movie. It opens with the usual new logo for the studio with the Steamboat Willie, but it changes to a 60. Um, of course, I remember when Tangled came out. That was the 50th feature film.
Mhm.
That one was a very celebrated. They even made like a little short film where they went through all the films in order, little clips of each one, and you can see like the development of the animation over time. Which that's a whole fascinating history in and of itself. If you couldn't tell by my tone, I'm a bit of a Disney nerd. I'm fairly proud of that. I've been invested in the behind the scenes history of the Walt Disney Animation Studios for some time. So it's like, say what you will about Disney, the corporation, but they've been doing some pretty magical stuff at the
Mhm.
animation studio, at least. Um, Incidentally, they turn 98 on October 16th of this year. So we're creeping up to our 100 years of Disney,
Mhm.
which, oh man, that's gonna be a celebration for sure. I'm definitely looking forward to that. Um, of course, the previous film in the Walt Disney Animation Studios canon was Raya and the Last Dragon, which was their Southeast Asian production, and that was on March 5th of last year, in theaters and on Disney Plus simultaneously. So the studio had been testing out different release dates for these films because, of course, it's pandemic time now, and theaters are in kind of a state of limbo right now. Like, is the traditional movie theater experience going to survive
Mhm.
this, or is it going to turn into something different and better, or is it just going to go away altogether? It's up in the air, I think. But with Encanto, they did something fairly special with this. So one of these other tests that they had done was they gave it a month in the theaters, and as I mentioned, they released this on November 24th, so that was Thanksgiving Eve, and they let it run for exactly a month until Christmas Eve on December 24th when they dropped it on Disney Plus. And it was a very interesting experience seeing the response to this. So the film did fairly well. Like the reviews have been, for the most part, very positive. Of course, you had occasional small reviews here of people who, on closer inspection, they didn't get it. And like they're even confused at what country the film took place in, which like it's clear throughout the film like where this is a Colombian setting. So I don't know where your heads were, um, but the box office numbers had been actually the best for an animated film during pandemic time.
Mhm.
At the time of recording, they are at over 223 um, uh, million dollars in the box office. Um, Now, according to movie rules, you have to kind of get to a certain percentage over your budget to consider the film a success in that you've made up your budget and then some. So on that technicality, theatrically, Encanto underperformed at the box office.
Mhm.
Granted, like when they dropped the film, we had the Omicron variant that was coming out,
Yeah.
and people were not comfortable going to a movie theater, which I totally get. Um, so when it dropped on Disney Plus, where it was available to more people who wanted to stay home to be safe, the popularity just jumped from there.
Mhm.
Like I think considering the Disney Plus release and being like one of the most watched films on their streaming service, uh, this has been like a tremendous success for the studio. And on my end of things, like I'm very pleased to see that because while I enjoyed Raya and the Last Dragon, their previous animated film, I was a little bit underwhelmed
Mhm.
and disappointed with a few things. Maybe we'll talk about that movie. Maybe not. I guess that remains to be seen. Um, but I was really hoping that the next film they would do would be a step up from that, and I would go in and I would enjoy it and have a wild time and think about it from then on. And as you can tell, like that's exactly what happened. Like I went in and I was very pleased with everything, and really enjoyed it. So I have a little bit of ease off of my chest now regarding the state of the studio because if you know your history of the Walt Disney Animation Studios, some films are kind of make or break, and depending on how they do, they can affect like the studio going forward. And this has happened a number of times throughout the past 98 years. Um, Now, of course, the next film that they have lined up, which is called Strange World, um, we don't have too much information on that one. Apparently, it's sort of like a sci-fi quasi psychedelic film where they have all kinds of like weird creatures and stuff, and they haven't really released a lot of information about it. But I'm also kind of worried about the film too because I have a feeling with the popularity of Encanto, depending on how much that carries, that might kind of overtake that film in popularity and kind of obscure it a bit,
Right.
which is what happened with Big Hero 6 after the release of Frozen, which, as we all know, was like a world phenomena with
Right.
that movie. Um, so I guess like that will remain to be seen. But kind of going a little bit into like the production of the film itself. So this was directed by Jared Bush, who was co-director and co-writer for Zootopia, as well as a writer for Moana, and Byron Howard, who was the director for Zootopia, as well as Tangled and Bolt. And so, as you may know from uh, the previous years, those films have been fairly successful, and so like they're kind of the new kids on the block as, in terms of like Disney directors going forward. Um, this was co-directed and was co-written as well by Charisse Castro Smith, who has done many plays and television, and this is basically her film debut as a director. She provided some important guidance on the Latin American characters and setting, and she was very integral to the creation of both Mirabel and Abuela Alma's characters. So she kind of helped authenticate the film to its Colombian setting, which I'm sure we're all grateful for. Of course, this was produced by Yvette Marino and Clark Spencer, and the film itself was conceived by Bush and Howard after they had finished Zootopia because they wanted to direct a Disney musical for a change. Which, I mean, yeah, that's kind of like trademark for Disney. You got to have your musical in there somewhere. And of course, like they wanted something different as well because they had been mainly doing buddy movies for the past few years. If you've seen Moana and Zootopia, you kind of know what I'm talking about. You focus on two characters who go on an adventure. Now, the musical score is by composer Jermaine Franco, and she also scored and co-wrote songs for Coco. Now, she studied with Colombian musicians to really get an authentic musical experience in the film, and that included the incorporation of like real Colombian-made instruments in the musical score. She would have them custom made in the country and then shipped over there, and would often arrive hours before recordings of certain scores. So this was a very active process, and she had worked to tie different musical rhythms to different characters, which is a fun trick in animated productions. You have these sort of motifs with each character that carry throughout the film. So like a different character might have a different style of music associated with them, like cumbia, for example. And of course, as was widely popularized in the trailers and promotion for the film, we have original songs by Lin-Manuel Miranda, the world's most famous Puerto Rican, um, who was also a writer and performer for Moana. So this is his second contribution to the Walt Disney Animation Studios canon. Um, and you know what? He really inspired the direction of the film's musical into a Latin American story from the get go. And he was very integral in finding the themes for each song and making them work within the story while also learning while he worked. Now, of course, Manuel Miranda has a huge track record ahead of him, all you Hamilton fans out there. Um, and it might be surprising to learn that despite his Puerto Rican heritage, he had a couple of firsts in this movie. The main thing being that the song Dos Oruguitas is the first song that he ever wrote in Spanish throughout.
Huh.
So it wasn't like he wrote it in English and then translated it later. No,
Right.
he had like uh, he had to double check his lyrics as well and translate them to make sure that they were understandable to a Colombian audience. He actually tailored it toward those local dialects um, because he's more comfortable speaking in English than in Spanish, which I guess is sort of a truism to that old stereotype about Puerto Ricans are the only Latinos who can't speak Spanish, which I'm certainly not helping. Um, but no, his contributions were big to the film, and it's kind of fun to see the Lin Manuel Miranda isms throughout the
Hmm.
score. Like there are certain songs, and we'll get into them in time, where like you can listen to it and you can know, okay, he definitely helped work on this one.
Right.
Like the lyrical style, you might as well have been watching Hamilton
Right. Yeah.
as you listen to some of the songs, which is not like a critique. Like
Hmm.
it's actually really fun,
Hmm.
and he has a very good range in terms of lyrical styles.
Yeah.
Now, while the film is not an adaptation of a prior work of literature, as many of the Disney animated features are, Encanto does directly rely on the theme of magical realism,
Hmm.
which we'll explain a little bit more later in the review. But it's basically a style of world building that is often associated with Latin America. And it has the characters take it for granted that magic is as much a part of life as the sun and the rain. Now, the focus on Colombia for the film was also inspired by conversations between Jared Bush and Byron Howard and two Colombian colleagues, that being Juan Rendon and Natalie Ozma. They had worked with them on Zootopia on some of their behind the scenes features. And it was their conversations that led them to pick Colombia as their Latin American country for the film. Um, and these discussions also led them to take a direction similar to what happened with Moana, where they actually built up a panel of experts on Colombia to follow and guide the film's progress and make sure it's authentic and true to the country, and also sensitive as well to the country's people.
Hmm.
So that way it's a comfortable experience for everyone involved. And so this led to the Colombian Cultural Trust. So while the crew were able to make a trip in 2018 to Colombia for research, as these films tend to do, if you want to set them in a certain location, you get to go on a field trip.
Hmm.
Um, Further work in the country, particularly by the animators, had to be done virtually because by that point the COVID-19 pandemic had hit. So, for example, there were certain members of the cultural trust who would take the crew on tours of various towns in Colombia by their phone cameras. So you got to actually go to certain places and kind of direct them there. But I think in the end, the effect was very strong, and I've heard it on good word from many Colombians that the film feels real, and it really captures what it is to be a Colombian
Hmm.
and living in Colombia, which is certainly all to the good. Albert, did you kind of have any thoughts going forward on the overall background of the film?
Yeah, that seems like a pretty good overview. Um, I think we're probably gonna dive into spoiler territory in a few slides, right? So, do we want to talk about like brief thoughts without spoilers?
Yeah, we can do that, sure. Um, oh gosh. Well, this is certainly for me an emotional film.
Hmm.
Um, Regarding the themes surrounding the story. So, of course, this is a Colombian family that is gifted with magical abilities. They can do all sorts of extraordinary things. That is except for our main protagonist, Mirabel, who is pictured here in some concept art. Um, and kind of seeing her struggle in this situation of being like a non-gifted child, in a sense, among this family of extraordinary people. Like that's very emotional.
Hmm.
I mean, I think we've all kind of been there to some extent,
Hmm.
where you kind of single yourself out among a crowd of extraordinary people, um, often to the point of maybe getting some like imposter syndrome or feelings of inadequacy, and like those aren't insignificant things to deal with.
Hmm.
Like you often carry those things throughout your life. And so I really felt for Mirabelle and her journey throughout the film. Um, Now, granted, the family itself, like the entire Madrigal family, um, are just a delight. Like the film has 12 main characters,
Hmm.
technically, which sounds like a lot, but when you watch the film and you see each of them with the amount of time that they've been given, they really grow on you, and you want to spend like more and more time with them, which is really funny to me, um, because there have been other Disney films with particularly large casts
Hmm.
where, at least on my end of things, and feel free to chime in, um, like I had a hard time kind of connecting with everyone,
Right.
and I would hone my attention more on like the main character or a few people out of the cast
Hmm.
more
Hmm.
than anyone else. Um, like that was a problem I had with Raya. Just to mention that briefly. I ended up being more attached to some of the minor background characters who join Raya on her journey than Raya herself. Um,
Hmm.
which like that's kind of a weird situation because she's our lead. She's supposed to guide the story. Um, but like even going further back in time, like I know Atlantis is a very popular film.
Right.
It did not do very well when it came out, but it has like a huge cult following nowadays, where it's well regarded. Um, and that was a film that had a pretty big cast. You had Milo and you had the Atlanteans like Kita, and then the whole crew that went underground and in the ocean to find Atlantis in the first place. And like, yeah, you spend time with them, and they kind of give you a little bit of like brief rundown biography stuff, like, oh, I was a doctor, oh, I was a boxer. Um, but like, you spend more time with Milo and Kita, and they're kind of just there to have their turnaround in their character from being bad guys to good guys.
Hmm.
And I don't know, that felt kind of flat for me. I felt like it was like way too many characters to juggle, and
Right.
like for me, I didn't think they did it fairly well. Um, and then of course, there's um, there's Meet the Robinsons,
Oh yeah.
which some of you might remember. That was during that weird time when they were just sticking with CGI animated films, and the quality like did a huge like peak throughout that period, from where it started. Um, but Meet the Robinsons is pretty well regarded today too. Like I've seen it on like the top 20 of certain like best Disney animated film lists, which that's pretty high praise.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that was another one with a big family. So that I think that's actually more of a better comparison with Encanto. The we do meet all the family members there very briefly, and there's like a couple scenes with like them all together interacting. Like there's like a dinner scene, for example, where we get the famous theme of the film, "Keep moving forward," which is very strong. That's I really like that messaging. Like I do like the film a lot too. Um, but yeah, again, I feel like there were similar issues with Atlantis where like we didn't spend like the right amount of time with all of them, and more of the story was focused on the main characters in that film. Uh, I don't know. What do you think, Albert? Do you remember those films by chance?
Yeah, I do remember them. Like maybe not super super well, but I definitely recall like pretty much all the aspects that you're talking about, and I definitely hear you there. I know when I first at least certainly when I first saw the trailer for Encanto, that actually was a concern that I had because it basically showed this big family with each of them with like their own kind of quirk, and then it's and I thought, is the story going to be able to juggle those so many characters? Because yeah, like you said, it can be very difficult for a story to revolve around so many different characters, and a lot of the time it's exactly like what you just described. It's like a lot of them feel kind of superfluous to the story or not particularly memorable, and you don't really get attached to them and such. And in the end, it feels like, so did some of those people really need to be there? And well, yeah, I think in this case they did very well in like giving all the characters focus, and they also did very well in like establishing the characters in the first place, so you know who's who. And I think just about all the main characters get like their own memorable moments um, and decent focus on, you know, enough focus that you grow to care about them and kind of enjoy them for who they are. So yeah, I thought that was something the film did very well. Um, I guess something else that I really appreciated about the film was what you mentioned about the magical realism style of the story, um, because yeah, it is so common to see stories nowadays about people with magical powers or like superhuman powers, and but a lot of those stories end up feeling very samey. Like think of all the superhero movies that are out there, um,
Yeah.
and a lot of the time it's like, oh, these people with these powers have to get together to defeat some otherworldly threat, and it can be really cool. But yeah, I think it can be a bit harder to kind of relate to that kind of story or those kinds of characters. Whereas in this movie, yeah, there isn't any kind of like overarching otherworldly villain to defeat or anything like that. It's a very different kind of story, and the central conflict is a very personal and intimate one. It's not like a yeah, not necessarily what you might expect from the premise. Um, so I really enjoyed that. Like I want to say, as I've grown older, I've come to appreciate like realism in stories, but I think that's not entirely true. I think that's something I've always kind of been into. Like when I was little, like my teachers had to like encourage me to read more fiction because all I wanted to do was read nonfiction books about animals and
Yeah.
science and stuff. And
I've
and
been
like
there.
yeah, and even when I actually did end up reading fiction, it would be like stories about animals, and a lot of time they weren't even like particularly fantastical stories about animals. They were stories about animals like being animals, or how they might interact with people in realistic ways. And yeah, so I feel like I've always kind of been into like stories with a strong focus on realism, and I think to see kind of magic being brought into the mix, but still having a very grounded and down to earth story, I think that's something that really appeals to me. So yeah, you know, and thinking back, like when I was little, I didn't really watch a lot of like superhero shows or anything like that. I mostly watched like educational shows about animals, and made I did watch a few series with that were like fictional. Like I think I watched like Arthur and Little Bear and such. And but those like
Yeah.
yeah, and those stories, you know, obviously they had fictional elements, but I think the stories they told were very kind of grounded in everyday life and such. And
Mhm.
so yeah, no, I mean nowadays, since then, of course, I have enjoyed a number of superhero movies or like high fantasy or like science fiction. But yeah, I think those are all very cool genres, and I've gotten a lot of entertainment out of them. But yeah, I think in the end, like coming back to realism, it's probably still a type of story that appeals most to me. So I definitely enjoyed a lot um, of that aspect of this film. I did enjoy the music as well. I know for the first time you said it didn't quite work for you, but and I know some people have pointed out, yeah, that's like some of the transitions to into the songs are a little bit abrupt and awkward,
Mhm.
and yeah, like you said, like there are definitely parts of several of the songs where you hear them and you're like, okay, that sounds like something out of Hamilton, and that can be a little bit distracting. I can see that, but overall, I liked all the songs a lot, and I think they're all very catchy, and yeah, they're great. So yeah, I think in general, if you don't let those aspects bother you too much, I think I think it's really enjoyable, and yeah, I definitely did like this film a lot. So I guess that's my brief review without spoilers.
Yeah. The realism angle. like I definitely feel you there. That's kind of like that's we had talked during our review for the story of Perrine
Mm,
about how the realism of that series connected with us because we had seen prior works that were a little bit more grounded in realism.
mm,
We brought up the Ghibli films, we brought up Hilda,
mm, mm.
and definitely for me, I'm sure for you as well a little bit. Encanto brought those to mind as well.
Yeah, I'd say
Um,
so.
Probably more so because
Mm, mm.
like magic is like a thing
That's
in
right.
this universe, versus Story of Perrine. And like what's fun about Encanto is that like that magic, like again, like going into the magical realism, like it's done in, well, I guess it's kind of redundant. It's done in a very realistic way. Like this isn't magic. Like there's like fanciful creatures and mythical things flying around. Um, it's just like taking what's already in the world and like heightening it up,
Right, right.
um, which is always kind of a delight. I don't know. I got a lot of Steven Universe vibes from this.
Mm.
From this.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
I think, I mean, definitely the emotional angle is part
Yes.
of that.
Yep.
That was a show that was not afraid to touch on some difficult topics, in an appropriate way, and but like handle them with dignity
Mm-hmm.
and honesty. And I definitely felt that with Encanto as well. Um, Mirabelle herself is definitely kind of a Steven vibe,
Yeah.
in a number of ways. Just a ray of sunshine to be around. Who like has she has her own problems, but she's been able to work it through in a lot of ways
Mm-hmm.
with a very optimistic tone.
Yep.
Um, so I don't know, kind of like between like the original Steven Universe and like Steven Universe Future, like that particular
Mm-hmm.
character is kind of like a merging of those two.
Right, right.
Definitely. So yeah, let's jump to the next slide, and yeah, this is our warning now. We're gonna touch on some major spoilers. Basically going through a rough summary of the film's plot, including its ending. So if you're coming into this having not seen Encanto and you were just kind of curious about like what we're going to be talking about, um, definitely stop here and go check it out. Of course, if you are fortunate to have Disney Plus, you can watch it there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Otherwise, I mean, if you're if you're lucky, like your local theater might still be showing it. Um, I know I looked around town here, and the closest theater that's still showing the film is in Virginia. So,
Wow. But clearly they are
yeah,
still showing it some places.
yeah, which I think is fair because I mean, in the age of streaming services, there's just so many,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you kind of have to pick and choose which ones you want. And some people don't choose Disney Plus, so they could at least have the option to go see these particular films in the
Mm-hmm.
theaters. So bravo to you theaters for still showing the film, because we have till I believe it's the 8th or the 9th of February that this film is going to drop on Blu-ray and DVD.
Okay.
So not too long from now.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, definitely go check that out. We're gonna definitely do our best to kind of like run through the main outline of the film before we get into more um, elaborate topics because we'll be talking about the history of Colombia and its general culture and environment, and go a little bit deeper into those as well as more behind the scenes facts about the film. So if you have seen the film, then please feel free to join us as we kind of revisit some of our favorite moments from the movie and,
Mm-hmm.
and dive a little bit into what makes Encanto tick. So yeah, without further ado, let's go into that.
Sounds good.
Yeah, we jump to the next slide. Um, yeah, first impressions. Well, the main thing I wanted to touch up on here is, I guess, more of the technical comments.
Mm.
So obviously, we're in an interesting time in the history of Walt Disney Animation Studios where the studio has kind of figured out what it wants to be for the 21st century.
Mm.
Um, we've had many decades of traditionally animated films in terms of like you going all the way back to like the cell cell production and zero scope process and on to the cap system where everything was drawn on the computer. And then there was a little bit of back and forthing between, well, there's this thing called Pixar now that's our our competition, which we would then go on to own.
Right.
So, so what do we want to do? And so like they decided to cease the production of mainly traditionally animated films and switch to CGI, and then kind of compete from there. And there were mixed results from the beginning, as we had alluded to. But I think by the time Tangled came out, by their 50th film in the 2010s, um, they had hit a nice middle ground. Because what a lot of people might not know is that a lot of these films do still rely heavily on the expertise and advice of traditional animators. Many of the people who worked during the Disney Renaissance, for example, are still employed, while others have gone on to form their own studios and projects. And they often give advice to the animators on how to work on these characters. And they've even hired some new animators to come in and work from there. So, contrary to popular belief, it's not like you go on a computer, you press a button, and it makes the movie for you.
Right, right.
It's a very integrated process, and
Mm.
there's a lot of complications involved. Um, if by chance you are interested in that sort of thing, and you do have Disney Plus, I would highly recommend checking out the short series on the making of Frozen 2. That was a very intimate look at how these sorts of films are made and the sorts of decisions that are made between all these different stations. And it makes you really appreciate how these films are made. Certainly in my case as well, as I've been following this history for a while. Um, but like nowadays with these CGI Disney films, um, they've been doing a lot of interesting things with the designs and with the looks of the film. While they've been advancing some of the visual components, I mean, if we think about something like Moana, well, the water effects in that film were spot on. But you'd also see things like Mini Maui. Maui
Mm.
has the tattoo of himself that comes alive. That was actually traditionally animated by Eric Goldberg, who you might remember from Aladdin. He was the guy who animated the genie. He was the lead animator on him, as well as in other films. He had worked on Fantasia 2000 on some sequences, and he did work on Louis the alligator from Princess and the Frog, and he did Phil from Hercules. So, very charismatic style that you look at those drawings and you can be like, okay, that's an Eric Goldberg piece. Um, so they're fusing the traditional and the newer elements together, and they're making some really wonderful things with these movies. Um, and as I've aged, I've been really excited to see this because a lot of CGI animated films are very samey.
Mm.
Like they 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 kind of just animate the movie as a CGI film without
Mm.
really kind of going the extra mile to distinguish themselves.
Right, right.
Um, and in recent years, we've been seeing many different studios do fascinating things with computer generated imagery. I mean, Into the Spider Verse is of
Oh,
course
yeah.
like the classic example. Which don't yell at me. I still haven't seen it yet. I definitely plan to, since now we got the sequel coming out.
Mm.
But I've heard wonderful things about it, and I am all on board. Like what I've been able to see from like previews and clips. Oh my gosh! Like, and of course, like there's also was it the Mitchells
Oh,
versus
yeah.
the
Right,
Machines?
right.
That's another one I still have to watch. Um, like those are CGI films, but the art direction is like way out there.
Right,
Like
right.
it's so stylized that it's unlike anything that's been done before. And like with all of this in mind, I am less and less woeful about the loss of traditional animation than I was when I was younger.
Mm.
Um, because like yeah, there is a charm to those traditional animated features. But at the end of the day, if you really think about it, everything is still done by hand,
Mm.
regardless of the technology that's used. So, you know, as long as you have a good story to tell, like, does it really matter what medium it is?
Mm.
I tend to not think so. Um, And that's not to say that traditional animation is dead necessarily. Just as we've been seeing this revolution with CGI, there's been sort of a silent revolution with traditional animation.
Mhm.
Many of you who celebrate Christmas might remember the film Klaus that came out on Netflix. Um, Now that one looks like it was done like on a computer, and like it was to an extent. But it has more in common with like the Renaissance films that Disney did in the '90s, like where they used the cap system, where they had done everything by hand, scanned it on a computer, and then colored it digitally. Um, but what they had done with that is they had gone into so much detail with the lighting effects and the shading that it doesn't look quite like traditional animation. Like it almost looks like CGI,
Mhm.
but it's not.
Hmm.
And you know what? Maybe that is the future of traditional animation. On top of things like the various short films that Disney has done, you might remember Paperman, which I think they released that before Wreck It Ralph, where the models were CGI, but then they went back over them and drew them in, and then drew over them
Mhm.
to kind of give a sort of traditional style that was a little bit more fluid than if it was just done automatically with traditional. So yeah, I think from a technical standpoint, we're in a really fascinating age right now with animation, and what Encanto has been doing with its effects, I thought was brilliant. I
Mhm.
mean, it's a very beautiful film. The colors are so rich, and the character animation especially is particularly special too. That's another trend that I've been seeing as well, where the old stiffness with CGI films is going away. Its
Mhm.
characters are allowed to be a little bit more dynamic. Um, so, like for example, what another movies other movies I haven't seen. I know the Hotel Transylvania films,
Mhm.
which I think a Sony did those too. If you watch those, it's almost like Looney Tunes levels of movement for
Mhm.
those characters. They're all flailing around and moving so fast, which you never really saw that like a decade ago
Mhm.
with animated films of that type. And Encanto is no different. I mean, like the choreography and everything is breathtaking with how these characters are moving, and it gives you energy to watch them move. Um, that's just been a big delight for me. What about you, Albert?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't have much to say without repeating what you just said, but yeah, this movie is like visually incredible, and not only that, not just on a technical standpoint, but also, like you said, it is very distinct looking. Like you see screenshots of this movie, and you know, yeah, those come from Encanto. Like, you can tell that it's part of this world, basically. Um, and so, yeah, no, I think it is definitely a visual delight, and um, that certainly adds to its charm. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So those are kind of like our main first impressions for the film. So if we jump to the next slide,
Yep.
let's kind of introduce the world a little bit. So for those of you not in the know, an Encanto basically is translated as a magical place. You know, it's a place of wonders, as described in the movie. Um, and also, in kind of a curious case, and Madre helped explain this to me, an Encanto also refers to the feeling of allure
Hmm.
with someone who is just naturally charming.
Huh.
You know, like this person is like, oh, this is really cool. I want to hang out with them.
Mhm.
And in a way, you can kind of see that in the film, especially with like Mirabelle and her family. You know, they're very charming people, and you want to be with them and hang out with them and follow their adventures. So there's kind of a double meaning there. Now, of course, in the film, like the Encanto is the village where everyone lives,
Hmm.
and it's secluded in the mountains of Colombia in the northwest, in what's known as the Coffee Triangle. This is basically where those crops are mainly grown in the country. Colombia has a very rich coffee economy, and you can't go into a supermarket that sells coffee and not find particular brands that come right from there.
Hmm.
So that's pretty fun. Um, and yes, the Encanto is purposefully hidden in the mountains. If you've seen from the film, uh, the miracle given to Alma created basically the Encanto. and created their home, this house that they live in. And that includes having these huge mountains surrounding the village
Mm.
to protect them from outside dangers. Now, a consequence of that, and before going forward, I will give a huge shout out to director Jared Bush, who has been hard at work on Twitter answering so many people's questions about this movie. Just little details, clarifying fan theories, even putting in some fun hints here and there.
Mm.
So if you're interested in some like the really nitty gritty stuff of a film, definitely pay attention to those, and we'll bring out a bunch of them in the review. Um, but so there is no outgoing trade with other communities in the Encanto. This entire village is a self-sustaining commune, basically, where people live there and they grow crops that are then distributed among the people. And it's basically based on how their old town economy had worked initially. Um, and so to that extent, like people can leave the Encanto if they wish, but they're gonna have a hard time finding it again
Mm.
because the sort of magic that surrounds the Encanto protects it from people who stumble upon it.
Mm.
So yeah, it's a very secure and secluded place, um, but that doesn't mean that the whole place is sour to begin with. We see throughout the film there's a vibrant community where everyone knows each other and they're able to celebrate and have fun with their families and send their kids to school. There's a school in the town, um, and it's just fascinating to me. It's almost like sort of like an ideal community,
Mm.
um, where there's a lot of mutual aid going on.
Mm.
What do you think, Albert?
Yeah, definitely. And I think something kind of related to the setting is it kind of relates to what I said about like the story being very self-contained and down to earth and personal. Is something that surprised me about the story is that the setting doesn't really change much. Like most of the story takes well, I would say pretty much all the story takes place inside this village, and the vast majority of the story takes place specifically within the house that the family lives in. So casita, as you mentioned here on the slide. Um, and yeah, that really surprised me because from the trailers, I got the impression that oh maybe Mirabelle or some of the other characters would have to go out and adventure maybe into the surrounding jungle to try and achieve whatever whatever goal they need to achieve. But no, that doesn't really happen. Like everything is self-contained in this village, and so some of the trailer shots are pretty misleading in that regard. And that really does add to like the kind of the realism I think of the story, um, and yeah, and the sense of community in the village too. That definitely features pretty strongly and comes into play a couple times in the movie. So it definitely is quite nice to see.
Oh yeah, because a big component of the film is that the Madrigal family, at least the ones with their powers, they have made a conscious effort to go out and help the community in any way that they can
Right.
using their powers. So, like for example, we see um, Peppa, the character, and we'll explain all these characters as we go. She has weather powers, so she can make rain, which could then go to fertilize the crops and water them, which can then go on to feed the people. So it's all working together, and like that's just really neat to see. Now, of course, if we jump to the next slide, we have Casita themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yes, technically, Casita is a character in the
Yep.
movie. The house is alive. It's a sentient house. It responds to the characters' wishes and needs and thoughts. Um, and regarding like the Casita's origin, of course, we have like the miracle of the candle, which protected Alma, uh, just spawned a house in the mountains for the family to live in, and we don't know exactly like why it was a house specifically. I mean, obviously there's a need to find a new home as we find out, but like why a living house? It's curious.
Mm.
Now, this has not been confirmed, but I know like a big theory that I've seen, and maybe you've heard this too, Albert, um, is that the house is actually Abuelo Pedro,
Ah.
kind of kind of, I guess, reincarnated
Mm-hmm.
into a house. So his essence lives on in a sense in the community, and thus his love surrounds the family even in death. Um, which would be very charming if true, um, but like that's not really confirmed in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Casita is just Casita. Like um, there's no really like pronouns or anything that goes with the house. Like the house is a house, and it can kind of change it as it needs to, which is pretty fun. I mean, I love Casita. I think in terms of like fictional houses, I'd love to live in. Like I would definitely love to room up in Casita and have that sort of convenience and joy there. Because we see early on in the film, like the house will help them like make their meals and set up for the day, and they need to decorate. The house can do it for itself. So it's just really really cool. Um, Now, like the big feature of Casita and of the Miracle is that everybody has a door. Well, most everybody, but uh, gifted children get a door, and when they open the door at the age of 5, they get their gift, which is part of the miracle. And so the door kind of has like this glow on the front of it with their portrait and their names and kind of some symbolism of like what their powers are. And then that then goes into their rooms, which are it's almost like the TARDIS from Doctor Who. They're kind of self-contained little worlds that
Right.
are bigger on the inside than it appears on the outside, which that's awesome. Like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Um, Now, one little interesting thing about the doors that has confused a lot of people is if you've noticed in the film when they show the pictures on the wall showing all the 5-year-old Madrigal kids with their new gifts and their doors, which by the way are not photos.
Mm.
So there's no color photography in the Encanto. So it's kind of a implied that those are magical photos
Mm.
that have been preserved in a way. Um, the doors apparently change their portraits as the person grows. That's what the director had confirmed, Jared Bush.
Interesting.
However, if you watch in the film, that doesn't really go
Mm.
because in the little portraits with the kids, like it's their adult forms on the doors. So, like, what's going on there? Is that an animation goof? I'm certainly very curious about that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so everybody, for the most part, has a room except for Mirabelle. So they have a nursery where basically the kids are raised until their special ceremony where they get their gift. When they turn 5, and Mirabelle did not get a gift, and so she's just kind of stuck there in the nursery,
Mm.
which has now kind of been her room. We'll see a little bit more of it later, but yeah, there is a bathroom in the house, and I say bathroom singular, which is just hilarious to think about for this
Right.
family of 12 who have to
Yeah.
share the same bathroom. Um,
Yeah. That that doesn't sound too convenient.
oh yeah, and apparently like there was going to be like a scene, in animated films like
Mm.
there are deleted scenes
Yeah. Yeah.
usually, things that don't stick. And they were going to do a fun scene with the bathroom to kind of play with that a bit. Um, but apparently the bathroom is a super magical place too, which is I mean if it's convenient as the rest of the house, I
Right.
mean
Right.
yeah, just heat up the shower, get the right temperature going while I get ready. Like perfect, that'd be great. Um, but each of the rooms are tied specifically to the characters themselves. So each gift is based on their personalities, and the rooms kind of reflect that. So, like in the film, for example, we see Isabella's room, which is just this pastoral wonderland of flowers, and plants. And of course, Antonio's room we see is a rainforest with all sorts of animals
Mm.
because he's a big animal guy. Um, Now, as fun as that is, we don't see everyone's rooms in the movie. Abuela's room, while this is not directly stated in the movie, seems to be a replica of her old room in the town that she used to live in with Pedro. And that Casita has just kind of preserved that for her. And we see a little bit of it towards the end of the film during the flashback song. And it's like, yeah, that looks just like where she was living before, which is kind of sweet.
Mm.
Um, Now, it turns out we do see Peppa's room, uh, Jared Bush did confirm that the scene where Camilo is kind of calming his mother down,
Mm.
and she's sitting in the room, and there's like rain wallpaper and like a weather vane, and there's like a lamp with like raindrops. It's all weather themed. Like, yeah, that's part of her room, but that's not the whole room. So I guess if there's any confusion there about what that room is,
Mm.
well, we do see her room, yes. But like Luisa's room, we don't see. Um, I know they usually do the junior novelization of the movie that comes out, and
Right.
apparently, her room has a lot of exercise equipment,
Mm.
which that's shocker.
Right.
Um, uh, we know at least that Dolores's room has soundproofing, which is fitting considering she can hear everything.
Mm.
Um, and we don't see Camilo's room either, but it's implied that uh, because he can shapeshift into different people, that his room has lots of mirrors, so he can like kind of look at himself in practice. Um, so there's a lot of fun stuff to the house. Like there's a big opening courtyard, which you can see all the rooms from there, and it's very much in the traditional Colombian style. Um, and it's just a delight to watch. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think the whole concept of a place that is sentient in itself. I think that's a concept I quite like in fiction. Ironic considering I said I liked realism, but I mean I think it's a fun concept that you can play with a lot, and they certainly do a lot of creative things with it in this movie. Um, and you might have wanted to mention it anyway, but it definitely reminds me a little bit of the ocean in Moana, for example. That's kind of
Yeah,
a similar concept. But yeah, no, I quite enjoyed that, and I think living in a friendly, self-aware house would be pretty nice. Yeah, that does seem like a good life.
it would definitely make furniture arranging a lot
Oh
easier.
yeah, and
But
cleaning
I
up
have
and
to
all that.
clean.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, rearrange a bookshelf. Can you
Right.
can you hold these heavy stacks while I figure out where they go?
Yeah.
I've been loving the meme where they compare Casita to. Do you remember Monster House?
Uh, Not that much.
That was like a weird Halloween movie
Huh.
where there was like a sentient house in the neighborhood that would like eat people, and like there would be disappearances in the neighborhood, and the
Right.
kids. There's these three kids that had to go and investigate. And then apparently like the house is like the soul of the owner's dead wife of a
Okay.
carnival.
Yeah.
It's a very macabre movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
But people have been making comparisons between those two and then shipping the houses, which is just
Okay.
which is that's fun.
Right.
People are very creative.
Hmm.
Um, Now, of course, like we're here for Casita, but we're also here for the Madrigal family. So if we jump to the next slide, we'll kind of give brief introductions to all of them
Yep.
if you're not too familiar with everyone. So just kind of running down the list here. So of course the matriarch, the guardian of the candle, is Abuela Alma, who is voiced by Maria Cecilia Botero, and incidentally, whose singing lines are done by Olga Merides, who was the abuela in The Heights, which was another film that was also Latin American inspired and worked on by Lin Manuel Miranda. So that's kind of fun. Yeah, so she's 75. So she was 25 when she founded the Encanto because
Mm.
that was 50 years ago. And she's sort of like the head honcho of the house. Abuelo runs the show, and she definitely does. Um, she kind of uses her status as the founder of the Encanto to kind of help the community. And that includes like directing her family members to do their different chores throughout the day. And also keeping an eye on the candle and making sure things are safe. Now, according to the directors, she is technically the antagonist of the movie, but that is not the same thing as being the villain
Right.
of the movie. Um, Abuela is a very complex character, as we'll see, um, and she's only an antagonist in the sense of being sort of a foil in the plot that has to be dealt with, basically. Um, which is sort of in the style of the most recent Disney films as of late.
Mm.
The traditional Disney villain who looks and sounds and acts like evil from the get go. We're a long way off from that. They've been doing different things now with their antagonists, and I guess depending on who you are, that's a great thing or a poor thing because people love their Disney villains.
Right.
They are a brand now, like the Disney princesses. You can get merch with them and follow their stories, um, which is always kind of fun, I think. Um, but of course, we have Abuelo Pedro, who of course is the patriarch of the Madrigal family. Of course, he is now deceased. He unfortunately died during the founding of the Encanto, as he was helping Alma and the community escape from the roving bandits that were attacking them. And his presence is definitely through the film. They keep a photo of him near the stairway, a beautiful portrait, where like they always recognize like, "Hey, Pedro,"
Yep.
and it's really sweet. So of course, Alma was pregnant and gave birth to three kids, triplets, of which we have Julieta, who is voiced by Angie Zapata. And her gift is that she can heal with her cooking. So she can make different foods, and you just eat them once, and whatever ailment you got, it goes away like that, which is super convenient.
Yeah.
Now, of course, her gift works as a combination of cooking and love. There's definitely like a motherly element that's important to her gift. And of course, because we know that the gifts are not randomized, but are tied closely to their personality traits, as well as a little bit of family perceptions, Julieta just must have been like a very nurturing and caring person from the get go. And so naturally, her gift would be the power to heal with her love, which is very sweet.
Mm.
Like she'll even use like medical plants, or excuse me, medicinal plants, as well as conventional food in making her meals. And like she can heal some very serious ailments, according to the directors. And like she can actually like direct her cooking to like specific ailments,
Mm.
um, which explains for those of you who have been curious why she chose not to heal Mirabelle and Augustine's eyesight.
Mm.
Um, she thinks their glasses are cool or cute, and there wasn't really a priority there. And then she was the first of the triplets to be born, followed by Peppa, who was voiced by Carolina Gaitian, who kind of reminds me of Miss Frizzle a little bit in terms of her
Right.
character design. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
um,
I can see it.
yeah, big vibes there. Um, so her gift is that she can control the weather. Now, what that means, I guess, depends on how you look at it. Peppa struggles with her emotions a lot. She's prone to mood swings, and that can kind of manifest against her will into various forms of weather. She can make snow, she can make rain, she can make rainbows, she can make tornadoes, hurricanes, um, and so anything in between. Um, Thankfully, though, like in her room, like it's conditioned in a way to where she can contain her weather there when she's inside it, when she's alone, so like it won't affect the rest of the town. But when she's outside, oh yeah, that can get out of hand. Um, what's funny about Peppa though is that apparently her original gift during the production of the film was that she was indestructible. So they had her into like this daredevil character who would like fling herself out of cannons and like crash into walls and have rocks fall on her, but like I'm okay, you know.
That's funny.
Um, but yeah, that was scrapped because I mean we already had Louisa, who was kind of they were kind of bordering on
Mm.
similarities there.
Yeah, fair.
She's definitely the strong one too. Um, and then of course the baby of the triplets is Bruno, who we're definitely going to talk about. Um, he's voiced by John Leguizamo,
Mm.
who I'm sure some of you might know. He's a comedian. He was Sid from Ice Age, as well as Alex from the Walking with Dinosaurs 3D movie, which yeah, that was a thing that happened. Um,
Right.
and his power is that he can predict future events. So he has visions. His eyes glow, and he can see events that happen in the future, which then get translated into like a jade like tablet, like a glass kind of tablet, which he can then show to other people. Like, hey, this is your vision. This is what I saw. Um, so yeah, now his power of prophecy is very emotionally taxing, and apparently, like it actually hurts him physically to an extent.
Hmm.
So as we've seen in the film towards the end, he had to devise an entire ritual, with the sand and setting fire to the leaves and that sort of thing, as a means to help him focus and calm down. Because it was one of those situations where you know, he did not really like his gift quite a bit
Hmm.
because he would do his job for the community. People would ask him, "Hey, can you give me a vision?" He's like, "Yeah, okay," and he would do it. Um, but then most of the time, it was not what the people wanted to see, and so they ostracized him for it and criticized him for it. Um, which sucked for him because I mean he was already sort of an introvert from early on.
Right.
He was not comfortable around people, especially as they began to hate him for his gift. So of course, when the time came where he just kind of had enough, which of course was after Mirabelle's ceremony, where she did not get her gift, and Will was like, "Find out what happened," and he saw that the vision of the house breaking, and then Mirabelle is just right in front of it. He knew subconsciously, like, okay, I don't want her to go through what I've been through, so I'm gonna just drop this, forget about it, and I'm just gonna get out of here because I'm done. And so he hid in the walls of Casita for like 10 years and basically kept to himself. He met some rats, and he kind of has a little community there that he hangs out with, and he was a recluse. And of course, that was a that seemed to have been pretty devastating for the family to the point where they just decided not to talk about him
Hmm.
and kind of ignore his presence and even embellish a little bit. Camilo goes on and on about these tall tales of like a sinister Bruno who's out to get you. When of course in reality he's just a shy, humble guy who's like you want to be friends with him, give him a hug. He needs a hug. Um, so then, of course, we have the husbands in the family. We have Augustine, who was voiced by Wilmer Valderrama, who, if you've seen that '70s show, he was Fez. Um, he is Julieta's husband, and he's very accident prone. That's kind of his personality. He hurts himself all the time, which is very funny because he kept getting injured so much, and thus having to go see Julieta to heal his injuries,
Right.
which sparked their relationship. Um, Now, of course, this was funny because Abuela was not charmed by his accidentness, and it took her a while to kind of win her over. Of course, Julieta, didn't matter because she loved him for him.
Hmm.
And he's a very quirky guy. Kind of a nice little look at his character. He's incorporated his three daughters into his outfit,
Hmm.
so he wears a flower in his shirt pocket for Isabella, and then his socks. He has two different socks on, with like corresponding colors and symbols for Louisa and Mirabelle.
Hmm. Hmm.
So if you look next time, you can see that if you haven't already. So like yeah, I mean he's a good dad. He cares about his daughters and he looks out for them above all else. And like that's good husband material, regardless if he keeps getting stung by bees all the time. um, and then of course we have Felix, who is voiced by Amaro Castillo. Felix, according to the filmmakers, he's just there to have a good time. He's a very chill dude. Um, he makes everyone around him smile. Even Alma,
Hmm.
he charmed Alma right from the start, and we see that very clearly in the scene in Antonio's room after his ceremony, and everyone's dancing, and he's the only one that can get her onto the dance floor to dance, which is like that should say enough for sure. Um, Now, for those curious, both Augustine and Felix's families do live in the Encanto, um, but we never see them in the film. And if we do, there's really no way to tell from like crowd shots, for
Hmm.
example. It's like, oh, like there's his sister or something, or his nephew. Um, but yeah, like they are outsiders to the family, but it's not like they came from outside the Encanto. They were
Right.
already living there when they met, which is kind of fun. Now, curiously, it was decided very early on that Augustine and Felix would not receive powers upon marrying into the family.
Hmm.
It's only for the children of the Madrigals at the age of 5 when they receive their gifts. And that was a conscious choice by the filmmakers as they felt psychologically, children begin to develop distinct personalities around 5 years old.
Hmm.
Like you can say, oh, this kid's crafty, oh, this kid's, really good with sports. So they decided to kind of set that there for the film.
Hmm.
And what's kind of fun about that is if one of the family members adopts somebody like a kid, like they are eligible to receive a miracle.
Hmm.
So the director revealed that. which is interesting story possibilities for any of you fanfic writers out there.
Hmm.
So then moving on to the kids, we have Dolores. She is voiced by Adasa, who's a reggaeton singer. In fact, she is the reggaeton princess, mind you. And her gift is that she has super sensitive hearing, which is not always voluntary,
Hmm.
which must be absolutely insane to deal with. She's definitely a character we feel for.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, Now, of course, how sensitive is her hearing, as to say, like, how far can she hear? Well, we don't actually know. Um, she can hear this whole chorus a mile away, but um, she's never been outside the Encanto, so she's never been able to test. But leads to interesting possibilities. Um, Now, she is younger than Isabella by a few months on Julieta's side of the family, and her kind of trademark squeaks that she does, which I just love. Um, well, that was developed as a quirk solely for that character, but it turns out that in Colombia, that is also kind of a trademark of what are called chimosas, who are gossipy ladies who are kind of nosy and they're always talking behind people's backs, and like they actually do like the little squeak when they're talking. So it's kind of like a fun little coincidence how that
Hmm.
worked out.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's Camilo, who's voiced by Renzi Feliz, and his name is inspired by the sound of chameleon, which is funny when you think about
Hmm.
that. Of course, there are no native chameleons to South
Yeah.
America, um, and his power is that he can shapeshift into different people, and that is like people alone. He cannot shapeshift into animals. They thought about doing that, but they decided against that during the production of the film. Um, and nor can he acquire the gifts of the family when he changes into them.
Hmm.
So, like when he turns into Dolores for that one scene, he doesn't have the hearing that she does. She just has he has like the outward appearance.
Hmm.
Um, and he's very good at what he does. So he can use both his normal voice and he can do vocal
Hmm.
impressions, which he took time to perfect. Um, but like his shape shifting does constantly tire him out, so he can't do it for very long.
Hmm.
And then of course, big theater kid energy. He loves to overact. We see that during the song. We don't talk about Bruno, of course, um, and which who he only knew about for a few years because he had just turned 5 when he left.
Hmm.
So his memories of Bruno are very hazy. So naturally, he wanted to embellish on that. Um, I mean, besides, Bruno really kept to himself anyway, so he didn't really have the chance to meet him all that much. Now, Camilo is interesting because he kind of went through a bit of a change in character development, like throughout the film, the film's production, because they were going to originally have him as like a foil to Mirabelle, have him be basically like an angry child who's always butting heads with her. Who, by the way, he's a few months older than her. But I think we're all glad that they didn't go with that
Hmm.
because he's a fun character in and of itself. Um, and of course, while it's not really stated in the film, Camilo as a teenager, he struggles in trying to understand himself. He's trying to find himself, which is funny because he can shapeshift.
Hmm.
So I guess like he kind of can figure out like who he wants to be,
Hmm.
which I'm sure all teenagers have gone through that. And then there's little Antonio, who's voiced by Ravi Kamat Um, and his power is that he can communicate with animals. We actually see him receive his gift in the film. He can talk to them and kind of direct them to different places and ride them around. And the animals can talk to him back. And it's very neutral. Very Eliza Thornberry going on here.
Hmm.
Although there's no like making animal noises to the animals. He just talks to them in his normal voice and like they can understand him, which was just kind of cool. Um, Now, incidentally, his name is inspired by Saint Anthony of Abbott, who is a patron saint of animals. So, like that, very fitting names there. So then, on a Julieta side of the family, we have Isabella, who is the firstborn grandchild of the Madrigals. She's voiced by Diane Guerrero, who, if you've seen Orange is the New Black, she's a character in Ritza. Um, and as the firstborn grandchild of the Madrigals, with her gift of growing plants spontaneously, so she can make full-grown flowers and bushes and trees on at will. Um, you know, that's basically earned her her presence as the perfect child or the perfect grandchild under Abuela Alma's gaze. And this is sort of the origin of her relationship with Mirabelle, in as seen in the film. You know, the two of them butt heads quite a bit,
Mm.
um, but they used to be very close. But like this constant need for perfection was the wedge that kind of drove them apart to begin with, which is, you know, that's kind of sad.
Mm-hmm.
But you see that it all works out in the end afterwards. Um, so then Louisa, now she's voiced by Jessica Darrow, and her gift is that she has super strength, and she can lift very heavy objects. As we see in the film, she can lift churches, she can lift rocks. The extent of her strength is questionable. We don't know exactly how far she can go, um, which is fun for speculation.
Mm.
I know a popular meme is like, oh, who would win in a fight, Louisa or Maui from Moana? Um, I just think they would be best friends.
Oh yeah.
But I'm inclined to think that she would probably win out in that instance. You know, because this is Maui without his fish hook.
Mm.
So I guess remains to be seen. Um, Now, what's interesting is that according to a few sources, and that includes an animator, Dylan Ekren, there was actually a little bit of conflict with Disney over Louisa. Apparently, it's and this is sort of a rumor. You know, this is not like the directors came out and said
Mm.
this, but we kind of have like hearsay. So I mean, maybe not. But apparently, like Disney did not want to have Louisa with like very prominent muscles
Mm.
as she is in the film. So they actually had to like fight over that design to remain in the film,
Mm.
um, which it did. So like whatever happened, it worked out.
Mm.
Um, but like I don't think like her character would have been the same without it.
Oh yeah.
It's very prominent, and I know she's very popular now among the fans. Um, and then of course there's Mirabelle, and she's voiced by Stephanie Beatrice. So she was Rosa on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, if you're familiar with that
Mm.
show. Um, Her name is interesting because it rhymes with miracle
Mm.
to an extent, but also like the first part of the name Mira. So that's the Spanish word for to see.
Mm.
If you know the end of the film, open your eyes. Like that's intentional. So so apparently she's 5'6", which is funny. So you can kind of get everybody else's heights from that, which means that Bruno is not 7 feet tall, um, uh, to be technical. Um, and her character design is very fun. Apparently, like her appearance is inspired by a tour guide who was named Alejandra Espinosa Uribe, who the filmmakers met in Colombia during the 2018 trip. She had curly hair, she had big glasses, and her overall posture was kind of similar to what Mirabelle would become.
Mm.
You know, she's very fun, but not particularly graceful.
Mm.
Um, but sort of in her own way as well. She's her own uniqueness out of the family. You know, she dances to a different rhythm, so to speak.
Mm.
Um, and so she is our lead protagonist. We follow her throughout the main story, and of course, she's the one who did not get a gift. She had her ceremony when she was 5, and she went to go touch the doorknob, and nothing happened. And it was a big mystery to everybody. Why didn't she get a gift? And so she became sort of an outcast
Mm.
in the family. Not to the level of Bruno, of course, but you know, people always tease her and they always say, like, listen, if you really want to help, you know, get out of the way, that kind of thing.
Right.
Um, which I guess I should also mention as well, if people haven't heard already, um, there is that fan theory from her flashback where she wipes her hands on her dress before she opens the door. And people are like, oh, she touched the candle, then wiped her hands on her dress, so therefore she wiped away the miracle. No, that's not true. The director confirmed that. You know, that's just because she's nervous.
Mm.
You know, when you're nervous, you get sweaty, and you know Bruno spelled that out in the film too. You're very sweaty. So um, there is that. Um, but yeah, so that's the Madrigal family. Now, of course, like they are the main characters, but they're not the only characters in the film. There's a couple others. Mainly Mariano Guzman, who is sort of like the suitor to Isabella. He's voiced by Maluma, who's also a Latin American singer. Um, I guess for all intents and purposes, he's kind of a himbo. Um, he he's just there to have romantic relationships with somebody, and so it all kind of works out for him in the end. But no, he's not. I was really worried that they were going to set him up to be an antagonist.
Mm,
Oh, like this again.
right,
But
right.
no, he's kind of he might very well be in the similar situation to Isabella.
Mm.
He he didn't want to get married, but his mom was like, "You got to," and so here I am. Um, but no, it all works out for him in the end, I think. Um, yeah, that's basically kind of an overall rundown of like who the family are and like what they can do. And if you couldn't already tell, like they are a wonderfully diverse bunch of quirky characters, and you end up loving each and every one of them. Uh, what do you think, Albert?
Yeah, definitely. Like we kind of mentioned earlier, I think the show does an excellent job of showcasing each of these characters, and so for most part, I think none of them feel like they're tacked on or like shouldn't be in the film or like overly forgettable or anything like that. I do think we get to know each of them pretty well, and um, yeah, come to appreciate their quirks and personality in each case. And yeah, I guess if it comes to like specific thoughts about specific characters that I might have, there definitely were a number of characters that stood out to me. But in many cases, like they stood out to me because of specific moments or plot points in the film. So I feel like we can save some of those thoughts for later when we do the recap. Um, but I guess I have a couple of general observations that I can mention here, and I've heard from you that Camilo is very well loved by the fandom, and yet he probably has the least amount of screen time out of the entire family, right? Um, and yeah, I do think if anyone got the short end of the stick, it was probably him in the movie. He also doesn't really feature like as prominently in terms of like actually moving the story forward. He does have some very memorable and entertaining moments in the film, but yeah, it did feel like his presence could have used a little bit of a boost. That would have been nice. Um, and I guess if I had to pick a favorite out of the cast here, it might be Dolores. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and for a couple of reasons for me. So first of all, I have mad respect for what she has to deal with when it comes to her
Mhm.
power, um, because like I do not like loud noises, like especially when I was little. Like I I could not enter a movie theater. The volume would just be too much for me, and I don't think I like properly watched a movie in a theater until I was, I don't know, like 9 or 10 or something. And even then, I was sat through the movies with my fingers in my ears. And yeah, it was only like when I got a little older that I was finally able to kind of like keep the fingers out of my ears and just sit through the whole movie normally in a theater. But yeah, like I'm not a fan of loud noises. I don't like say fireworks, for example. And so yeah, for someone with her powers, like who can hear even the tiniest little noise and even very distant noises, I'm sure like loud noises must be like horrendous. And I know in a few scenes in the movie we can actually see her like covering her ears when, say, the
Right.
fireworks go off and such. So yeah, it kind of speaks to that. So yeah, that definitely I have mad respect for like being able to deal with that and not just breaking from it. And something else that I liked about her character was just the fact that um, with her power, like that's a power that could be used very easily for very manipulative or nefarious purposes. Because we see in the film that she kind of has like the know on everybody. She knows everything about everybody because she hears everything in the town, and so like that's information that you can use for like very very nasty things if someone wanted to. But as far as we see in the movie, like that doesn't really happen at all. I mean, I know she does have a bit of a reputation in the story as a bit of a gossip. There is one part in the film which we'll get to where, yeah, yeah, where she overhears something that Mirabelle had wanted to keep secret, and then immediately Mirabelle panics because like she knows that Dolores was gonna tell everybody. And eventually, yeah, she does. However, if you consider like everything that Dolores must know and doesn't seem to tell people. I think she actually has a lot of self control and a lot of restraint, if you think about it. And in fact, we kind of get a hint of this just before the movie ends because she reveals at the very end, and this was actually something I wondered about when I was watching the film, because as you mentioned earlier, it turns out that Bruno, when he disappeared from the family, he didn't actually leave the house. He just kind of went into the walls and hid there and started living there. And then it is only revealed like halfway through the movie that that's what happened to him. And then when they did that reveal, I wondered, oh, so if he was in the house the whole time, wouldn't Dolores have heard him? And well, sure enough, in the at the very end of the film, she does reveal that yeah, she actually knew all along that he was there, and just didn't tell anybody. And yeah, I just thought that was a really nice touch. I think she definitely does have a pretty decent presence in the film, but I definitely would have liked to see and kind of get more inside her head, I guess, to kind of see things from her perspective, because I'm sure it must be very interesting. And I guess on some level, it's something I can relate to because, of course, I like gathering information in certain fields and then telling other people about it, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I have this show, right? Um,
Yeah.
but there are things like in when you're doing scientific research, when you're in the scientific community, there are things that you can tell people, and there are things that you can't. Like sometimes there's research in the works, like that you might have heard of, but it's not really ready to be publicized yet, and you have to keep it secret. And so yeah, like you have to kind of be able to make those decisions about how much to tell people and how much information to spread. And yeah, that's something I can kind of relate to. So yeah, I guess those are kind of my non kind of plot specific comments on the characters here. But there definitely are some other characters that I would like to talk about in more detail later.
Oh yeah, same here. And definitely, yeah, the cast. Um, I don't have a favorite character.
Mm,
I am drawn more towards Mirabelle,
mhm, mm,
and I'll explain more towards the end of the review.
yeah. Mm,
Um, but like, it's so hard to pick a favorite because like I'm just attached to everyone. I think about, well, I do like this character a lot. Oh, but then this other character here, and then there was this part. It just gets over out of
yeah.
hand.
Yeah.
Um, but I definitely think their dynamic works very well. And
Mm,
yeah, you bring up a good point. You really can't take anyone out and replace them and like not have it affect the plot.
right. Right.
Um, like even with Camilo, maybe he's like towards the end of the spectrum there,
Sure.
where he doesn't really impact the plot in a great way. Um, but like his dynamic matches with
Oh
everyone,
yeah.
which is to say, against something like maybe Meet the Robinsons, where you could easily take out or replace any of those family members in the future family, um, but it doesn't really do much for the plot.
Right.
Like yeah, like they really made everyone for the most part work through the movie, contribute something to the movie. Um, and in fact, yeah, I was talking to you about Camilo earlier. Um, but what's funny is like after the fact, I did a little bit of digging,
Hmm.
and I looked all through YouTube because people have already done the character compilations of all
Yeah.
the scenes
Yeah.
with
You're right.
Camilo or
Right.
Dolores, and I compared all of them, and you know what? They all actually match up for the most part
Oh,
in
that's
terms of screen
interesting.
time.
Yeah.
They're all between about 4 to 6 minutes
Hmm.
a piece.
Right.
And I wonder if that was intentional
Yeah.
to make sure like each family member got their appropriate time for a 90-minute film.
Right. Right.
And I think that was the case. Which if that is the case, like they did it fairly well.
Oh yeah.
But that's something I definitely noticed for sure. But no, everyone is just fantastic.
Hey everybody, this is Albert editing in post. We have decided to split this review into 3 different videos, so if you want to continue to the next part of this episode, where we recap the plot of Encanto and highlight moments that stood out to us, please check out the links in the description below.